Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing Judea and Samaria. This was a special report presented to President Obama on the occasion of a state visit to Israel in March of 2013. You can see the subtitle of the report, "It's Jewish, it's vital, it's realistic," in reference to Judea and Samaria, which is what Zionists insist on calling what the rest of the world knows as the West Bank. And you can see here they're trying to romance the president, and we get a bunch of statistics here. 4 cities, 13 local councils, 150 communities, 360,000 Jews. And obviously now we're in 2025, so it's more than a decade on, so this demographic data is outdated. But they're trying to present this as simply some sort of growing Jewish colony without reference to what it really is, which is occupied land. Although part of the reason I cover and read reports like this is not because I like to torture myself, but because it's important to know what your enemy thinks and how they justify their actions. And you will see in here how they justify their reasoning that they are actually the governing authority in what they call Judea and Samaria, that there is no occupied territory, that there is no such thing as Palestinians. As I ask ahead of time, my voice gets elevated as I read through this. Please be patient with me. I will do my best to stay calm as I read through a bunch of lies. Jewish settlement throughout the eastern mountains of the land of Israel has developed increasingly over the past 5 decades. Despite this, not everyone is familiar with the open spaces, history, tourist attractions, people, and the importance of developing Judea and Samaria. That first sentence, could you imagine? Not everyone's familiar with Judea and Samaria and the tourist attractions and the open spaces. We've been occupying a people and committing a slow walk, genocide, and ethnic cleansing against them, but not everyone might be familiar with this. In 2010, the Council of Judea and Samaria embarked on a PR campaign called Judea and Samaria, It's Time to Get Acquainted. We are now proud to present our first comprehensive publication, which offers a concise presentation of the relevant knowledge needed to acquire a more comprehensive understanding of the region's importance. Judea and Samaria, It's Jewish. A description of the importance of Judea and Samaria and the history of the Jewish people, the connection to Jerusalem, and the aspects of international law that tie the Jewish people to the land of Israel. They're going to cite international law for themselves. Wait till we get there. It is our belief that the truth and facts of Judea and Samaria must be disseminated to the general public and policymakers so that we can finally start down the path to stability, security, and peace for Judea and Samaria's Jewish and Arab citizens alike, allowing the heartland of the Jewish people to flourish once more. It should be noted that there are no Palestinian citizens of Israel inside the West Bank. When they're talking about Arab citizens, there are Arab citizens of Israel that live in what is internationally known as Israel. But in the West Bank, when the Palestinians got occupied there, they were not given any sort of residence or citizenship rights. And any rights that they have are transient and are subject to Israeli approval or disapproval. So they don't have sovereignty there. And they were not granted citizenship. So the way that that's phrased, Arab citizens, would imply that there are widespread Arab citizens in the West Bank, and that's not true. 36, the Jews still constituted the majority of the land's population. In the centuries following the Arab conquest, the land was neglected and the population gradually dwindled. So we have to stop right there. So this is something that they will use to make a case for why they have to come in. The land was neglected. Well, first of all, what is the rubric? What is the metric for whether land is neglected or not? And if it's your land, you have the right to neglect your land. You are not required by moral or legal law to cultivate the land. You can and you should. It's probably needful for your family, for income, and for the good of work for the human soul. However, this is listed as one of the casus belli it's listed as a casus belli here by the Jews. The land was neglected and the population gradually dwindled. Again, what is the metric for that? So it didn't hit some peak, some KPI set by nobody. So this creates a narrative that the land was empty. No one was really there. It was neglected. There wasn't anybody there, but this is demonstrably false. There were millions of Palestinians living in that area, and they had thriving farms and beautiful vineyards and beautiful olive orchards. And to say that, we would have to go against all the photographic evidence, all the demographic evidence we have at that time. But because no one really goes back and studies this, they're able to assert this, even to someone like President Obama, who has read a couple books in his time and knows a little bit about the Palestinian cause, although he didn't really ever do anything for the Palestinians. They're just trying to present this as a fact. But just here, the land was neglected and the population gradually dwindled. Vague statements, no backups, and part of building a narrative of, well, this was an empty land, so we just came in and took it. During the period when the majority of the Jewish people were in exile in the diaspora, the land passed from one foreign ruler to another, yet no nation made it their national home. This is again false as well. There was, when it makes it sound one foreign ruler to another, like this was happening every couple years. It did change. You had a crusader state over part of Palestine. Then you had basically different caliphates, which then would devolve into what we would come to know as the Ottoman Empire. And talking about centuries of rule there. And so when they say no one nation, it was under an empire. So it was stable under an empire for centuries in this greater Syria, greater Palestine as a province of this area of the Ottoman Empire. So yes, it may not have been a nation in the way that modern nation states have been the case, but that's like saying because Germany didn't exist until 1870, there were no Germans. So just because a nation state doesn't exist doesn't mean the people don't exist. This is a specious argument. So no nation made it their national home. As conquerors came and went, the Jewish people always prayed to be mercifully restored to the land of Zion and Jerusalem. If this were true, this statement, the Jewish people always prayed to be mercifully restored to the land of Zion and Jerusalem, why are there Jews living outside Israel? Why is it that Jews in Arab countries had to be bullied and lied to in order to get them to Israel in the late 40s, early 50s? Why did Iraqi mosques have to have bombs planted in them by Mossad to threaten the Jews and say, oh, guess who planted the bombs? It couldn't have been us. They had to scare Jews into coming to Israel. But if it was true that the Jewish people always prayed to be mercifully restored to the land of Zion and Jerusalem, why are there Jews living outside Israel? If that's the narrative. But this isn't the narrative. It's not true that the Jewish people always prayed to be mercifully restored to the land of Zion. Some Jews maybe did. But trying to speak for all Jews here are the zealots who had put together this report for President Obama. After centuries of neglect, the area began to flourish once more upon the Zionist return to Israel and the aliyahs of the late 19th century. An aliyah is a wave of immigration. So they would refer to the first aliyah, the second aliyah. But this flies in the face of what we could see. If you look, I did a film club on Palestine 1920, and you can see a flourishing land, majority Palestinian, that was doing just fine without the Jews in force, as they were trying to say. If the Jews come in force, then the land transforms magically. The land was transforming due to industrialization and investment and the fact that it's always sat on an axis, a critical axis between Egypt and Turkey, and that road passes through. That's part of what's on a kafia. If you look at a Palestinian kafia, the lines there represent that road that comes up from Cairo all the way up the coast. So I'm sorry I couldn't even get through that paragraph, but every single paragraph, every single sentence in the paragraph contains vagaries and half-truths that start to create this idea of an empty land. Which, if you have an empty land, then you can come and claim it. That's the idea. So now they're going to have a talk about the Balfour Declaration, and the subtitle is "Legitimacy Through International Law." I mean, we always say on this channel, every accusation is a confession. This is something that's widely talked about among pro-Palestinian advocates. And here it's the same thing. What you mean is the opposite: illegitimacy through international law. The mandate for Palestine, which was granted to Great Britain by the League of Nations in 1922 for the purpose of establishing a Jewish national home in the land of Israel, recognized this historic right. So, firstly, The mandate for Palestine, granted to Great Britain by the League of Nations, it's not clear that the League of Nations had a legal or moral right to do this. And in any case, in all the other mandatory countries, the preparation was for the local population to take control. That was the idea. The mandate was for babysitters, effectively, or mentors, if you want to look at the more the best interpretation of it, that the mentors would help people prepare for self-government. So in all the other countries, in Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon, those countries came into their own sovereignty. It was only in Israel where there was a dispute. And in the Balfour Declaration, there is a reference to, Professor Rashid Khalidi talks about this all the time, there are 9 references to antiquities, but no references to the Palestinians. All they say is the non-Jewish native peoples. And this next bullet point, only the Jewish nation received assurances and an international declaration to establish a state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan. So I wrote in the column why, and how irrelevant that is. So what they're saying is, well, only the Jews got it from this international body. So what that means is that millions of people who live there, it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter if somebody in some international body makes a declaration. What matters is who lives there. And the people who live there, they have a right to govern themselves and they have a right to live on their own land. So just because some international body makes a declaration and says, oh, this is for the Jews now, it doesn't make it legal. That's the strange thing. They're trying to say because the Balfour Declaration said this, and that was incorporated into the text for the Mandate of Palestine, which was never accepted by the Palestinians. The Palestinians never accepted the Mandate for Palestine. There was a revolt in 1936. I have a video I've done on Hassan Kanafani's book, short summary of the revolt. If you'd like, I'll put a card as well as a link in the description. I'll also put a link for a discussion about the mandate in general. There's a scholarly article done. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card talking about the morality and legality of the mandate. While Israel has never annexed Judea and Samaria, remember this is the name they have for the West Bank. While Israel has never annexed Judea and Samaria, with the exception of the eastern neighborhoods of Jerusalem and the area around Latrun, thereby exercising its historic and legal right, that decision has been based on political and diplomatic considerations rather than legal constraints. Oh, the only reason we haven't annexed is because, of politics. Legally, it's ours. British Foreign Minister Arthur James Balfour declared, His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. As a result of the Balfour Declaration in 1922, the League of Nations elected to transfer the territory to the British with the intention that the mandatory should be responsible for putting into effect the declaration in favor of the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And it leaves out the rest of the quote without prejudice against the existing population. So it's convenient for them to cut that out, so they cut it out. And what's interesting here, too, is the link between the Balfour Declaration and the entry of the United States into World War I. There's an interesting article related to that. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card. The purpose of giving the mandate to Great Britain by the League of Nations is outlined in detail in the preamble to the mandate. Recognition has thereby been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. In that country, which means that country already exists. This document is legally binding according to international law. I wrote LOL right after that. Because if you look at the text, it says their national home in that country, not as the country. And you cannot simply say, we're going to create a country and we're going to cleanse everybody else, and then you get to say this is international law. A law is an ordinance of reason promulgated by the proper authority for the common good. So this fails on almost all of those things. It's not an ordinance of reason to say that you can establish a country where there is already a country. It's not promulgated by the proper authority because it's not clear to anybody that the League of Nations has the authority over the state of Palestine. And it's not for the common good because the people who are the majority population here, the pre-existing Palestinians, have no voice, have no one speaking for them at the League of Nations, no one speaking for them at the United Nations. Conclusion of Israel's War of Independence, read here ethnic cleansing, an armistice line was formed, which was formally accepted in 1949 within the parameters of the Rhodes Armistice Agreement, serving as a reflection of the military powers on the ground at that time. The prospect that this map would be used as a basis for determining future borders was rejected outright by all Arab nations. This is true. The Arab countries demanded that the Green Line serve only as a demarcation line between the military powers and not as an expression of ownership or sovereignty over territory. So, while that is true at the time, if we look at the pragmatism of what has evolved, even up to recently, so this is 2025 when I'm doing this recording, we have Hamas saying, without prejudice to other claims that have been made, we are willing to move forward with a solution that accepts the Green Line as a basis for a two-state solution. It is Israel that is opposed to this. So the people who have been flexible here have not been the Israelis. And a document like this is only going to more forcefully assert Israeli rights. Later, the Six-Day War completely altered the map of the region. As a result, Israel obtained for the first time a clear presence in all lands guaranteed by the mandate, and then some. It's not mentioned here, in all lands guaranteed by the mandate and other lands that have nothing to do with the mandate, the Sinai, the Golan, the Sheba farms in Lebanon. This fact, combined with Israel's strong connection to the aforesaid territories and the fact that Jordan illegally annexed the territories in 1948, completely undermines and negates the argument that Israel is illegally occupying a territory. Notice through all of this, there is no discussion of the people who live there. And I don't remember who is it that said this. If someone remembers this in the comments, please let me know. But the question is asked, if this is your land, tell us your stories. The Palestinian people have centuries of stories upon that land. It is their land. Now, did Jews live there? Certainly they did. Did Jews live there from the time of Christ and before? Certainly they did. So the argument that because, let's say, there were always some Jews here, that we get claim to all of it is a crazy idea. It's a crazy idea on its face. But it's tied to this vision of the Jews as the chosen people and tied to their view of their religion. And keep in mind, this is Talmudic Judaism, which is this new religion which was created after Christianity, a different version of Judaism. Section 242 reads, the fulfillment of charter principles requires the establishment of a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, which should include the application of both the following principles: withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict, termination of all claims or states of belligerency and respect for and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area, and their right to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries, free from threats or acts of force. The specific wording of this document determined that Israel was obligated to retreat from territories, not the territories, referring specifically to only some of the territory obtained during the war, but not all of it. The wording was not coincidental. Of course not, because we know that the Jewish lobby lobbied for this wording. Before it was agreed upon, numerous debates were held throughout various UN institutions in which there were bribes and bullying, in which it was clearly determined to give Israel the opportunity to protect under its authority those territories necessary for Israel's security. This was in stark contrast to the Soviet Arab stance, which contended that the resolution should state all territories or territories on all fronts. Even this argument that's being made here, they don't specify which territories. They say, okay, well, some of the territories. Okay, well, which ones? And there are still occupied territories from this war, including the Golan. When the peace treaty with Jordan was signed in 1994, rather than negotiating for sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, Jordan abdicated all responsibility for and claims to the territory. As the Arabs had never claimed the territory prior to Jordan's illegal annexation of Judea and Samaria, the 1994 peace treaty left Israel as the sole legal claimant to the territory. There's a lot here to unpack. I'm going to try to limit myself, otherwise this review is going to go on for an hour. So, firstly, Jordan has a complicated history when it comes to the Palestinians. They're the only state to have given citizenship to many Palestinians, whether that's good or bad, whether Palestinians had to accept it or not, that is an entirely separate discussion. But they also hosted Black September and attacked the PLO. They also fought alongside the PLO in some of those border clashes with Israel in the early days. And the majority of Jordan is now Palestinian. So Jordan is complicated, but this idea that the Arabs never claimed territory, notice throughout this document, there's no discussion of the Palestinian people. There's always this. So since no one else made any claims, that means it's ours. So once again, what about the people who live there? Do you think that they're making a claim just because no one is speaking up for them in these large international bodies? That means they don't exist? That's the narrative that we have to accept. So this is what's going on here, is they're arguing in this first section that since the T's weren't crossed and the I's weren't dotted and no one was there at these big international bodies, these people don't exist. In July 2012, a report written by a governmental commission led by the Honorable Supreme Court Judge Edmund Levy, Honorable Judge Chia Shapiro, and attorney Alan Baker, an expert on international law, was published. The Levy Commission report, they're going to cite a commission report by Jews about Judea and Samaria. What do you think this commission is going to conclude? The commission closely investigated the legal issues involved in the establishment of the settlements in Judea and Samaria and concluded, from the point of view of international law, Israel is not an occupying force in the region. Consequently, the establishment of the Jewish communities in the region of Judea and Samaria bears no illegality. Furthermore, the commission concluded, Israelis have the lawful right to settle in Judea and Samaria. Headline, Jews investigate Jewish settlement and conclude that it's legal. What a surprise. They actually cite this as some sort of proof. Well, we investigated ourselves and we found that it's legal. So it's legal. So this next subtitle, Judea and Samaria, it's Jewish because of Jerusalem. And they wrote, without Zion, there is no Zionism. And I wrote, who cares? Who cares if there's no Zionism? Zionism is a cancer upon this earth. In the 20th century, the Zionist Congress discussed and eventually ruled out the possibility of establishing a Jewish state in Uganda. The outcome of this discussion was the coining of a phrase that would ultimately determine the Jewish people's future in their homeland. There is no Zionism without Zion. But I wrote in the margin, why even discuss it? So the fact that it was even discussed at the Zionist Congress meant it wasn't a ridiculous idea. If it was a ridiculous idea, you don't bring ridiculous ideas to a Zionist party Congress. The fact that it was discussed, that meant there were advocates for this idea, that meant that it was possible to conceive of a Jewish state not in Palestine, and that it was a question of having a state, not necessarily having a state here. Now, obviously, there is a religious, emotional tie that can be argued for this, but I wrote, why even discuss it if it's not a possibility? So there were discussions of other places, even less so than Uganda. Argentina was another one. But the point is, it doesn't only have to be here. And that's just something worth considering. Different subject entirely. Jerusalem is surrounded on three sides, north, east, and south, by Judea and Samaria, which protect and strengthen Israel's capital. Without Judea and Samaria, Jerusalem will be surrounded by those who oppose freedom, replacing Theroux as the new frontier in Israel's war on terror. So here they're arguing geography, that because it's close by, as if there are no other similar situations around the world in which you have a nation's capital, or in this case, alleged capital, near a border with someone who may not be an ally. That's not a reason to deny the sovereignty of the people who you disagree with. They have not relied solely on the outcome of negotiations. In recent years, quietly, steps have been taken to undermine Jerusalem's status as a united capital. In Jerusalem's eastern and western neighborhoods, thousands of Arab families have settled and built illegally with the assistance of radical Islamist third parties. Today, more than ever, it is clear that without Judea and Samaria, Jerusalem is lost. I wrote LOL in the margin. Every accusation is a confession. They want us to believe that that it is the Palestinians who have been settling and building illegally in East Jerusalem, when we know that the documentary My Neighborhood just gives one little insight into that with a young Mohammed Al-Kurd. I'll put a link in the description as well as the card. I think that's my 5th card. I'm probably all out of cards at this point, but I'll continue to put things in the description that I referenced during this review. But go and look at that documentary and see whether it's believable that the people who are settling illegally are the Palestinians. In the years preceding the Six-Day War, when the Green Line was still an armistice line with Jordan, Israelis lived in constant trauma. I wrote LOL here. This is the country that has bombed every single capital of its neighbors, and they're the ones living in trauma. They're the ones we need to be worried about. As noted in Yediot Aharonot at the time, the people have lost their sense of security and fear defeat. With the situation worsening and a growing economic recession at hand, for the first time since the War of Independence, emigration actually eclipsed Aliyah, immigration to Israel. The common reason for the problems was fear, as the enemy stood in close proximity. The regular forces of the Arab armies were a mere stone's throw from Israel's major population centers. And I would say what's changed in 2025? There were millions of Israelis that left after October the 7th, and they have not returned. So what's changed exactly? And this is after many, many decades of occupation. The Palestinians are not going away quietly as much as these people would like them to. To make a pragmatic argument, with the Green Line as its border, the amount of land necessary to maneuver would be insufficient for Israel to design a contingency plan to successfully defend Israel against a military incursion into its borders. So since this is not enough land for us, then we can't agree to it. Of Israel is an island of stability within the turbulent Middle East. Can I keep reading? Israel, the sole democracy in the region, is surrounded by totalitarian regimes that are currently facing revolutions and the threat of Islamic radicalization. So, does that even pass the basic smell test? Israel is an island of stability within the turbulent Middle East. If the Middle East is turbulent, it is because of Israel. If Israel is stable, despite everyone else being turbulent, it's because they are the ones inflicting the violence on everybody else. And this idea of the sole democracy in the region, that this paints them in something that democracy is saintly, it's holy, it's better than everyone else. It's the best form of government ever. This is their idea, that we deserve protection and holiness, even though if democracy means bombing all your neighbors, who would want anything to do with democracy? People who are quote unquote standing up for democracy. Is this what you mean by democracy? The genocide of a people, the occupation of a people, the murder of children, the documentation by UN doctors and other doctors of children being sniped in the head and the heart. This is democracy in the Middle East, the sole democracy in the region. When negotiating pacts with countries in the region, Israel must now consider that any truce signed is likely to be violated following a regime's downfall, leaving Israel with fewer strategic assets and more empty promises. But if I just stop at any truce signed is likely to be violated, who is that? That's Israel. We saw this in the way that the deceitful way that they joined the UN when they were going to talk about a peace deal for the Palestinians and possibly discussing refugee return. They said, we'll come to this peace meeting. This is a condition for you joining the UN. Okay, we go. And as soon as they go, they say that things are off the table after they got their UN membership. So when you look at these accusations, you have to really think about, why is the region the way that it is? Part of it, a huge part of it, has to do with Israel. And this doesn't just involve them, it involves the United States, it involves everyone who supports Israel in its murders and then cites in their defense, Israel has a right to defend itself. That's crucial in this document. If Israel is an occupying power under international law, occupying powers have no right of self-defense in occupied territories. So then you realize people are caught in a dilemma of legality. If you say it's occupation, which almost all of these nations do, then occupying powers have no right of self-defense in territories that they occupy. But they want to have it both ways. The United States, the UK, France, all these people recognize this as occupied territory, but then they say Israel has a right to defend itself. But those are mutually exclusive ideas when it comes to an occupation. Here you see a list of deaths from a timeline 1990 to 2010 of Israeli deaths, and you'll see something like 4 in 1999. And then they put Operation Defensive Shield 2002, and from the First Intifada until the Oslo Accords, 186 Israelis were killed in terror attacks. Since Oslo, 1,531 Israelis have been killed in terror attacks. This doesn't contextualize Oslo, what a betrayal it was. I'll put a link in the description to a film club that I've done talking about Oslo. But during the deadliest year of the Second Intifada, 2002, there were 497 Palestinians killed. So, never mentioned. All throughout this document, the Palestinians are never mentioned. It's always the Israelis. It's always about them. Then they talk about water resources. Part of why we need Judea and Samaria, well, we're running out of water. So that's why we have to have it. And the theft of Palestinian water over and over and over, that's been discussed in other documents and that I've reviewed on this channel. And I put lots of LOLs and Ys here when they're talking about Palestinians have consistently violated these water agreements in relation to Oslo, unauthorized drilling. People, how dare they drill for water on their own property? Water theft, when an occupying power cannot control the water resources, and yet they do. And they're the ones who steal it. Untreated waste. Why are the Palestinians unable to treat their waste? Because they're not given the resources and the ability to create waste treatment. And their sewers, their power stations are bombed. Now, but they're talking about demographics. Time is on our side, and I wrote nope. And this was, I don't know if this was an optimistic period in 2013 when this document was written, the idea that we're definitely going to outproduce, we're going to have more babies than the Palestinians. This doesn't seem to be true. Obviously, if you can't have more babies, then you need to murder them more and harder, and they've been doing a good job of that recently. We've witnessed the historic return of the people of Israel to its native land. This has been and will continue to be a long, complex process requiring patience, faith, and determination. Since Israel's inception, it has been forced to contend with difficulties and challenges far worse than those it faces today. At present, Israel is stronger, more powerful, and more independent than ever before. While Israel currently faces formidable challenges from numerical, military, and economic standpoints, Israel has exponentially improved its ability to meet these challenges and overcome them. While we do not have an answer for every problem that may face Israel in the near or distant future, including its problem with the Arabs, remember, it has to be the Arabs, they can't call them Palestinians. All of the solutions being currently put forward pose a far greater danger to Israel than the status quo. This is especially true in this volatile period of drastic change and instability in the Middle East. We believe that to ensure the fulfillment of the Zionist vision of Israel's return to its homeland and of a Jewish state in the land of Israel, there are a number of steps that Israel must take. The only reason I've read that all the way through is because I'd have to stop. I'd have to just keep stopping every single sentence. And as I said, we'd be here for an hour. And I want you to go read this document. So part of why I'm reading excerpts from this, as I always do in these cases, is I want to give you a taste of what the document is and offer you a chance to go read it yourself and deal with it. But what I just read to you could be read on Fox News, it could be read on CNN, any of these mainstream talking points who ignore what the Palestinians have to say and just repeat Israeli talking points. This is their narrative, that somehow they are the victims, despite being the attackers, despite being the murderers, despite being the killers, the rapists, for decades, for a century now. Yet somehow they're still the victims. And they always will be. That seems to be the case. So fulfilling the vision is a 9-step plan. Renewing the strong belief in the supremacy of the Jewish claim to the Jewish homeland and the justness of taking measures to maintain control of it. You might add a subtitle, Strong Belief in the Supremacy of Jewish People to Everyone Else. Uniting the nation and its leadership. Military strength and control of the territory by the security establishment. The elimination of terror and cessation of incitement in Palestinian schools. We will not allow the Palestinians to have thoughts about what is happening to them. They must not be allowed to think. creating a situation where it becomes clear to the international community that another state west of the Jordan River is not viable, well, that one's a big failure. The further immigration of 1 million Jews to Israel to secure a permanent Jewish majority in Israel. We're going to need to move more people in here because we're not reproducing fast enough on our own. And where are all the Jews that were dreaming about returning to the land of Israel for all of these millennia? I thought the narrative was they were dreaming. Why do you need to encourage people to move here? They should all be on the next plane. At best, I think half of all Jews live outside of Israel. So it's at 50-50, if not maybe more Jews live outside. So what does that say for their claim? 1 million Jews in Judea and Samaria, tripling its Jewish population. I think they've been successful on that number since 2013. The creation of large residential areas surrounding the current communities of Judea and Samaria. I think they've also been successful in this. Opposite Daniela Weiss. I'll put links to the descriptions featuring that horrible genocide grandma. The execution of a construction, development, and economic plan for the million residents of Judea and Samaria. So there's this horrible document in brief. I suggest you read it yourself. And if you haven't already done so, please consider like or subscribe. It's an easy way to support the channel and get this material out to more people who would benefit from hearing it. People with open minds. People are actually interested in hearing what's happening in Palestine. I'll put a link in the description for you to download this document. It's free. You can find it online. If you want to thank me for this presentation, there's PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee below. If you want to support this work on an ongoing basis, get early access to videos like this one, as well as the opportunity to engage with me on one-on-one Q&As every month, there's Patreon and YouTube membership. That's also linked below. If you'd like to sponsor a book in the future, my Amazon wish list is below. If you click on that, it'll take you to all sorts of books. Obviously, the ones on Palestine are for this channel. I have a Stephen Heiner channel as well if you want to check that out, and that'll be the other books. But if you want to sponsor a book here, buy it, send it to me. I will do my best to review it in a timely manner. A reminder that if and when this channel gets monetized, 100% of the profits will go to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which is a medical charity that helps Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. They're a worthy cause, and you can support them indirectly by watching as many videos as you can here, or visit them at pcrf.net and support them directly. Yeah, they're a worthy cause, and you can see their work for yourself when you visit the website. Until next time, enjoy your reading.